Let me start out by saying that I'm not someone who gets upset easily. But my mother-in-law always knew just how to get under my skin and leave me bubbling with anger. My husband's mother had always hated me for some reason, even though I'd never done anything that could have possibly upset her. Every time she'd see me, she'd always make rude comments towards me. One day we went to her house for a barbecue, and as soon as she saw me, she said,
"Wow, you've certainly gained a few pounds."
Whenever this happened, I'd only smile and pretend I hadn't heard any of the comments she'd make towards me. Of course, by the time we'd leave, I'd be upset and on the verge of tears. Strangely enough, neither my husband nor my father-in-law ever noticed anything. Whenever I tried to talk to my husband about it, he would say,
"Why would my mom ever do that? You're just being dramatic."
After a while, I stopped trying to convince people about what she was doing and how it made me feel. I started to believe that that it was all in my head and that I was just being dramatic. After all, nobody else thought the remarks she made toward me were concerning. Of course, because of this, her behavior towards me only worsened. Whenever my husband and I were invited over to their house, it seemed as if my mother-in-law would always find excuses to have me do chores for her.
"Oh, now look what you've done, you brainless girl. You've brought dirt into the house."
I had no idea what she was talking about, as I had never brought dirt in since my shoes were spotless. And I always made a point to never make a mess when I was at her home. Despite this, she would always hand me a broom or a cloth and tell me to get to work cleaning. On top of that, whenever she served us food, everyone would get delicious, warm home-cooked meals, and I would get half-frozen microwave dinners. I would look over to my husband, who never paid me any mind as he ate his food.
"Sorry, dear. I just didn't make enough food for you." Again. But of course, you really don't need the extra calories anyways now, do you?
No matter how many people were at the house for dinner, there would never be enough food for me. I would always be stuck with frozen meals. It was so obvious she was doing this on purpose. There was no way she'd accidentally make just enough food for everyone but me this many times. Obviously, though, I would never say anything against her. At that point, my husband had convinced me that I was the rude one. In fact, he had convinced me that I was crazy for suspecting my mother-in-law for purposely doing all these things to me. After all, who was I to question his mother?
"You're being too sensitive. If you keep complaining about my mom, I'll divorce you. She's never done anything wrong."
When he said this, I broke down crying. I couldn't take it anymore. It felt like everyone in his family was against me. I had never felt so alone before. It was like I had no one on my side. I didn't know what to do, so I turned to the one person that I knew would help me. I wiped away my tears and walked into an empty room where my husband couldn't hear me and called the one person that would support me. "Hi, Mom. It's me. I really need your help right now." Talking with my mom helped me to feel more confident, and I knew exactly what I had to do. She assured me that I had been right, and that what my mother-in-law was doing was definitely on purpose. It felt good to be believed, and know that I wasn't in the wrong for being upset. Together, we came up with a plan to get her to confess to what she had been doing to me. I knew that for my own sanity, I had to prove to the rest of my husband's family that I was right. And so I asked my husband if we could have dinner with her parents. "Honey, do you think your mom would like to have dinner with us tonight?"
"Well, I see you finally come to your senses. I'll give her a call and ask."
And so my plan was put into motion. That evening, before we went over for supper, I made sure to wear the nicest outfit I owned and told my husband to do the same. Trust me, tonight is a special occasion. I'll be making a special announcement at dinner, so we'll need to look our very best. Once we were dressed in our best outfits, we went over to my mother-in-law's house and were greeted at the door by both her and my father-in-law. Upon seeing our outfits, visible uncertainty crossed her face.
"Oh, what's with the fancy getup? Some sort of celebration going on that you haven't told us about?"
She shifted uncomfortably before stepping aside and letting us in. I couldn't help but grin. All these years of her making me uncomfortable, and now... Oh, how the tables have turned. And yet the fun was only beginning. "Did you need help with any chores? I know getting things done around the house can be difficult for someone of your age." I smiled innocently as my mother-in-law sputtered, trying to think of a response. She frantically looked around the room, trying to think of something, anything that she could make me do, but she couldn't come up with anything. She only huffed and walked away embarrassed as I continued grinning. Everything was going perfectly so far. At last, it was time to eat. As expected, I was given frozen food, but I didn't let it bother me. Instead, I smiled and ate what was given to me without complaint. Across the table, I could see my mother-in-law staring at me, slack-jawed. I knew she could tell something was up. This was the first time ever I'd seemed genuinely happy to be eating what she'd given me. I smugly looked back at her, chomping on the frozen peas in the package, along with something I could only assume was meatloaf. After a few minutes, I stood up and addressed everyone. Attention, my beloved family. I have a very special announcement to make this evening.
Is it really that special?
Huh? Her sudden question broke my stride. But undeterred, I brushed it off as just another attempt to get under my skin and continued. As I was saying, we have a very special announcement, I said, while pulling my very confused husband up to stand with me.
We do?
Yes, we do. We've been keeping a very, very special secret from all of you. And now we feel it's best to let you all know. I'm pregnant. Silence fell over the dinner table. Everyone looked at one another, as if waiting for someone to react first. Once the initial shock of the announcement wore off, my mother-in-law leaped up from her seat in excitement.
I'm going to be a grandma. Oh, this is the best day of my life.
She ran up to me, hugging me and crying. She blubbered out how much she was sorry for the way she'd been treating me and how wrong she was to do so. Everyone else stared at her in shock and horror. Here she was, a crying mess, openly admitting to harassing me for the past few years in front of everybody. As calmly as I could, I slid out of her embrace and stepped back. You won't be seeing my child, not after everything you've done to me. In fact, none of you will, especially you. I pointed to my husband as I said the last part. He was speechless and struggling to find his voice after what I had just told him and the rest of his family. We're done. You were just as bad as her. Actually, you were worse, as you were incredibly dismissive of me and my feelings, and for that, you'll not be forgiven. With that, I stormed out of the house and got into the car. Seconds later, my husband came running out, crying and begging me not to go.
Please, I'm so sorry for not believing you. Please don't leave. I promise I'll change. I'll get better just for you.
You had your chance. You brought this on yourself. And with that, I drove away. I left him and his horrible family behind, while I began preparing to move in with my mother. Just like that, I never saw my husband again. As for the baby, well, there never was one. It was simply a white lie that I used to have that horrible woman confess to her wrongdoings. From that point on, my life started getting better. I was much happier living with my mom, and a lot less stressed. It felt good leaving the way I did, and I truly felt that they got what they deserved. Honestly, I'm really glad everything worked out in my favor, and I was able to move on to a better life. Thanks for watching. Like the video for the algorithm.